Hello and welcome back to this episode of Five Alarm Task Force. If you're listening to the audio, if you're watching us on the video, thank you for joining us, and we're happy to have you with us as well. I'm Steve Green, your host. Happy to be here with you and happy to have you here with us. My guest today is up from the snowy, cold north. Actually, right now we have to say the smoky north. Chief Dave Robertson has 25 years in the fire service in 5 different departments, from busy urban systems to wildland to rural and semi-rural. He has instructed within his fire department in fire academies, paramedic schools, private fire institutions, and now is the Deputy Chief of Training for the Lambton Shores Fire Rescue. He is fueled by a sincere passion to make the fire service better, which today includes talking to his classes about his own struggles with PTSI or PTSD. He hopes that by being open to recruits right at the front end of their career about this very real threat, that each recruit will be able to have a long, joyful career. Welcome aboard, Chief, number one. And number two, a fellow Canadian, Chief Arjuna George, who you may know. Okay.
AJ, yes.
Right, has just launched his podcast. He's 8 episodes in. He was a guest on my show. And he said, I'm going to do a podcast, I think. And I said, you should, because you have such a topic to share with firefighters around the world. Now, we're very lucky on this podcast. We've had up to as many as 42 countries tuned in to our podcast. We're able to see that on our snacks. And it's only probably in the last couple of years that I've really had a closer focus to our Canadian brothers and sisters. And I had the chief was on, and I have another friend from Manitoba, Brad Davidson from Manitoba, and as I mentioned to you, Bill Dungy with six Foxtrot. So I'm getting to learn and pay more attention to what's going on in Canada. And when you reached out to me through LinkedIn, I was amazed and elated that you came to me and you had this topic about hiring based on character. And just before we started the recording, we talked about the fact that across this country, our countries, I should say, North America, we are seeing a lot of departments, both career and especially volunteer, but a lot of career departments still struggling to fill the vacancies in the departments. And a lot of this we see is post-pandemic. The pandemic took a hell of a toll on fire and in emergency services in general. All our groups, fire, rescue, law enforcement, EMS, and even those people who help us, even the recovery operators, tow truck operators, and road rangers and stuff, there are openings there. So this pandemic has taken a huge toll. And so we're all trying to recover from it in many ways. But I think that one of the things that you bring up is that sometimes we may be over anxious to hire and we don't turn over enough of the leaves to make sure that we have the type of candidate that we're looking for. So let's start with that, please, is how we get past the problem of maybe not vetting as properly and as deeply as we should.
Well, so first of all, I just in the bio, now I am from the Great White North. I currently am with the Fire Department of the Great White North. I'm a Canadian boy, born and raised, but my career was almost exclusively in the States.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, absolutely. California, specifically. So the perspective that I come at this topic with, and some other topics that I do try to address, but this topic specifically is the perspective of truly North America wide, and how I've been able to see how things are happening in both the States and Canada. The hiring practices, well, first of all, operationally or tactically, there are some differences between Canada and the States. Far less aggressive firefighting in Canada, as far as I'm seeing. I think part of that is I think some of the initiatives towards public education have been a little sounder. They've landed with a little more success. I don't know if that speaks to the Canadian culture and how they've received it, or if that speaks to the various entities that have pushed these programs. So there are some differences tactically, operationally, between the two, but in hiring practices, there really isn't. It's about the same. It's always about the same. And that process is, somebody, a fire recruit sees a job posting, they fill out the application, they forward the certificates that are applicable, and that changes from town to town. I mean, you can get two towns. One town says, are you warm-blooded and breathing? Yeah, that's good enough. And the town right next to it can say, you have to have a college degree in fire science or fire technology. You have to have NFPA this, and this, and you need a minimum of 3 years as a volunteer firefighter before you can apply to be a career firefighter here. And they can be towns side by side. So it does change. But the process is essentially the application, the level of certification, and then part of the vetting process is you do a site test. There's still some holdouts out there that will do a lie detector test, although that's pretty rare now, just because they're so unreliable. They'll do, of course, a physical agility. They'll do a medical check. They'll do a background check, and they'll have, excuse me, the interview process. And it's in that interview process that I think that we are failing the most or the greatest. And it's not necessarily just because of the pandemic and wanting to just get, bodies in the uniforms. I think that there's elements of that. Excuse me, sorry about that. There's elements of that. But this vetting process, this interview process, the one that I just outlined, from application to final interview, chief's interview, has been the same, at least in my career, which is, that 25 odd years. 96, I think, is when I started, 96, 97. The dates are a little blurry. So, yeah,
Yeah.
anything 5 years ago, and things are starting to get a little blurry. In that interview, we ask for all this stuff, right? We ask the recruit, for example, in California, just only as an example, it changes state to state, province to province, but you have to go to a California fire academy in order to get your NFPA 1001, which is the firefighter standard. So you get your firefighter 1 and firefighter 2. You typically need CPR. Some places will actually request additional NFPA certifications, ice rescue, water rescue, various levels of technical rescue. They want a fairly robust resume. And I've already outlined some of the other processes, the background check, physical agility, et cetera, et cetera. And we tell them consistently, okay, recruit, everything really happens in the interview room. Okay, the job is won or lost in that interview room. So get ready. Get ready to really reveal yourself. And we get them in the interview room, and our first question is, so tell us about yourself. These pedestrian questions. So where do you see yourself in 5 years? I mean, I got asked that when I was applying for a job in a burger place called Harvey's here in Canada when I was 16 years old. And we're asking these potential career firefighters these pedestrian questions. There's a town, I don't want to mention the town because I don't want to get in trouble, but there's a town that I'm very familiar with. And it's this open secret where floating around among all the recruits for years now is this photocopied 2-sheet document of the interview questions that they're going to be asked. Now, that in itself is maybe not too bad. It definitely speaks to they're obviously, to them, to that fire department, the interview process is a throwaway, right? Yeah, we'll just ask these. They were good enough 10 years ago. They're good enough now, right? It's that kind of thinking. But the questions themselves are very much in that kind of very pedestrian, very mundane kind of vein. We don't give these recruits the stage to truly reveal themselves. And then we're shocked when they fail in academy, or fail out in probation. There are some changing numbers out there, for sure. Part of it is the pandemic, and part of it is just how grueling the fire service has made the application process. It was not that long ago that you just need a couple of fundamental certifications, and now they want a grocery list of certs, and that costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time for a recruit. That's a tough thing to do when you're 22 years old, right? So I think that that's starting to limit the number of applicants that we're getting. But aside from the pandemic and the fire service demanding all that stuff on the front end, those two things sort of limiting the number of applicants that we're getting, for the most part, it's still pretty heavy. I've got a good friend in San Francisco. They run 3 academies a year. They hire 56, I believe it's 56 for each academy. And he figures that for the 56, they typically get somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 applications. And those numbers are consistent. I know Toronto as well. Same thing. Toronto just did a very heavy hiring. The Greater Toronto area. It's a very large department. I think it's now the 3rd largest in North America. Well, technically the 4th, because CAL FIRE is the largest in the world. Then it goes FDNY, LA County, I think.
Yeah.
Toronto, LA City, Chicago. I think those are the top 5. So Toronto's a very large department. They just did a huge hiring, 2 or 3 hirings of 98.
Wow.
Each, and then a 4th hiring of 46. And they were getting thousands and thousands of applications in for those 98, which really gets me down to the brunt of my assertion that you and I spoke about when we first chatted on the phone, and that is, let me go back to San Francisco. So they have 56, and they hire 56, knowing that they are always going to lose in each academy 6, 7, or 8, with only typically 1, sometimes 2, to injury. So that means that they're consistently losing 4 or 5 in every academy due to conduct issues, misconduct, or somebody that gets into academy and says, you know what, maybe this is just not for me. So my assertion is, you're telling me that you get somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 applications for 56 top candidates, and you can't find the right character? I think that's on us. I really do think that's on us. Quick little sidebar, I talk about hiring for character. And I think one of the things that needs to be addressed is, what is character? That's a tough thing. That's an elusive thing to define. There are organizations out there, there are bodies out there that are definitely moving towards stricter definitions of what character actually is, and how to teach character, how to recognize character. One that comes to mind, ironically, it's in a university about an hour away from where I'm at here in Ontario, but they're gaining recognition worldwide. It's the Ivy School of Business, and they're defining character on these 16 key virtues. There's a certain element of what is good character. And it's what I'm trying to remember what Chief Justice it was, but it had to do with a pornography case. And he was asked, well, how do you know what pornography is? He says, well, I'll know it when I see it. Right? It's a famous statement. And I think there's an element of that with character. What is good character? Well, I'll know it when I see it. Right? I know what good character is. It's that intuition in the interview room. It's that gut feeling in the interview room. Well, obviously that gut feeling is failing if we're failing out 4, 5, or 6 in this one city, one American city, each time, and I think that's indicative of what's happening across North America. For those, so that's kind of those virtues that we need to define and get away from just gut feeling, and just get away from I just know it when I see it, are those virtues of higher levels of moral fiber, right? Temperance, care for others, just being generally virtuous. You're going through life. You're not wearing the hat of it's all about me. You're actually wearing the hat of it's all about my fellow man. And that's character. That's good character. So now we need to define that in the interview room. And we're not, because again, we talk about firefighters need to have this level of moral fiber. They need to have these key elements of good virtue. They have to have good character. And we ask them, so where do you see yourself in 5 years? Why are we doing that to ourselves? And we're shaking our heads. I can't believe we lose 5 every academy. We're running 3 academies. That's 15. That means in my career, well, I'm not going to do the math because I'm on camera and I'll get the math wrong. But it's in 10 years that's 150 people that have failed out. 20 years, it's 300 people that have failed out. Somewhere in the process between getting hired and completing probation. There's not a lot of hard data in terms of. I'm definitely digging in, and I'm developing a survey now that I'm going to throw to the International Association of Fire Chiefs to start collecting more hard data on how much money it takes to run a recruit through. But it starts nudging towards 6 figures by the time they finish probation. Right, so it's big money that we're throwing at these recruits. The uniforms, the benefits, just the application process, the time, just all the resources that go behind, just even giving somebody a shot. So if it's 300 in 20 years of my career in that one city, nudging towards 6 figures, right? Now you break that across North America. If those numbers are indicative of fail rates, that's many, many, many millions of dollars. That's nudging into hundreds of millions of dollars in monetary loss for municipalities. And that's just the monetary loss.
Right. Just before we went on the air, we were talking.
Go ahead.
We were talking about the late great mentor, Alan Brunocini, Chief Alan Brunocini. And I was just thinking when you were saying about some of these questions, that he had one key philosophy that he said over and over again, and many of us learned from that, which was, what is our job? Our job is to take care of Mrs. Smith on her absolute worst day, even if that day for her, it's her cat up a tree. And we have to be there to take care, because that's her worst day. So with that said, that would be a great question, I think, to include in the interview process. If you had to go to Mrs. Smith's house twice a day for 4 days in a row, you're going to start bitching and moaning about, I can't believe we have to go on these calls. I have to take care. Depending how they answer that question, that could be a good tell.
There's no secret that the fire service, there's a very strong element of aggressive firefighting, right? And I don't know how many times in my career when I've run medical calls, and we've gone on Mrs. I've had Mrs. Smith where this frequent flyer consistently waited to call after midnight. She just wasn't feeling right. She was literally a 30-second drive around this corner and across this parking lot to the hospital she wanted to go to. And she would call us a couple times a night after midnight. So we've had Mrs. Smith. And we would, we'd get back to the firehouse after a call, with the metaphorical Mrs. Smith, and you hear it all the time, F and EMS. I'm not going to drop an F bomb on a
Right.
podcast,
Right. Yeah.
but it's F and E. I didn't sign up for this. Yeah, actually, you did. You actually did. This isn't what firefighting's about. That's interesting. I've got a picture in my pictures file on my computer, the 1969 firefighter paramedic class in LA County. Yeah, you did sign up for this. We've been doing this for a long time, 50 plus years. We've been doing this. But we've got to find that. We've got to find that chink in that recruit's armor.
Right.
Right. And we're not. It goes back to that interview process. The interview process is short. It's always the same. It's by the time they get to the second interview, maybe the third interview, it is usually some level of union representation, right? A firefighter from the rank and file. If it's a unionized house, you'll have a deputy chief or an assistant chief, the chief, and somebody from HR. It's always the same. It's some variation of those 3 or 4, but it's always roughly the same. One of them is always the scribe. They're sitting in the background, writing down roughly what we're saying. And we're feeding them. It's just like that town that I know of with this open secret about the interview questions that every candidate knows what's coming. Well, if we're giving them a script, if we know this script is floating around out there in terms of what interview questions are going to get, guess what we're going to get back? We're going to get their script back. If I had $1 for every time I've heard a recruit that I've worked with that says, well, I want to make sure that I tell them what they want to hear. No, actually, that's the opposite. We want to know about you, but we're the ones at fault because what do we do, right? I love this. So why do you want to become a firefighter? We'll eventually get to that question in some form. Why do you want to be a firefighter? What's your why? And they'll eventually say, well, I just want to help people, right? Everybody says it. I just want to help people. And we're sitting there and we're scribing these answers. And, oh yeah, he wants to help people. Yeah, that's great. No, that's BS. We know you want to help people, right? Get in there. Right, we've got to really peel that onion, right? We've got to let those first 2-3 questions, to get in there, but really get into the core of what this recruit is truly about. What are they reading and why? Where have they traveled? Tell us about one of your dreams that is not related to firefighting. What's your definition of family? Like things that actually you see them sweating a bit, you see them struggling because they're having to sift through the dust up here a little bit to really get to the core of what they're about. Give it to us in the form of an answer, right? And see if what it is that they're saying, that revelation about themselves, what they're saying aligns with what our fire department's core values are. That's what we should be doing. We're not.
I have a strange analogy, but it holds here. When I have an older brother, 5 years older than me, who became a conservative rabbi. And I knew after I was in the youth groups and became president of the youth group, especially in high school, that's what I wanted to do, but for a different reason. My brother was scholarly from an early age, and he wanted to get into it for the scholarly purposes. And he became a great scholar, retired now for 10, 12 years. So when I applied to the same seminary, and I took all my individual tests, and then I came to the group interview. And this woman on the committee said to me, goes, well, aren't you only doing this because your brother was here? I said, no. She goes, well, I think you are. I said, with all due respect, ma'am, I think you're wrong. Well, why am I wrong? I said, my brother is going into it for the scholarly purposes, and I admire him for it. We've always gone along. We have healthy debates about different aspects of Judaism. I said, but we do it scholastically. It's never attacking each other. We just do it. I said, I'm disappointed that we don't get enough families coming into the synagogue itself. you drop them off at school, or you drop them off at the the kiddie service, and then you go on your way. I said, I want to work with a family. I want to bring families in so they understand the synagogue is a place of gathering. Not they have to, observe every rule and every law, but we're together and we learn together and we live together and we celebrate together. That's why I want to go. Oh, so if your brother very next question. So if your brother jumped off the George Washington Bridge, you're going to jump in after him? I said, yes. She goes, well, I told you. I said, no, I'm going in to save him, ma'am.
Yeah.
I've already qualified as a water safety instructor. Have you?
Yeah.
I said, have you? She goes, what's that? I said, well, that's the difference between you and me, ma'am. I said, I knew what I want to do. And part of what I'm doing is helping people by becoming a water safety instructor. I said, I even teach the lifeguards. Now, do I ask every lifeguard, are you here because your brother was here 6 years ago? I said, no. I see what the element of that student is, and can they be a good swimmer or be a lifesaver? So when you just were saying that, I was living through that all over again. I'm sitting at that damn table, and it's the exact same thing. I gave them everything I had done, all my academic achievements, all my outside achievements in Jewish tradition, everything I've done, all that stuff. And all she could see was because my brother had graduated 6 years before that's why I was doing it.
Yep.
And so I didn't get in.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah, she was already biased.
Yeah.
When she knew that your brother was in there, and that speaks to because that is a good analogy. That you're correct. That definitely is an analogy that holds to this. We a lot of times the interview panel is hand raise. Hey, we've got some interviews coming up. Who wants to be on the panel? Yeah, I guess. Well, it's and that is their level of preparation. I'm definitely coming across some good anecdotes. I think of the city of Vancouver here in Canada, for example, where they actually put them through some fairly rigorous training to be on that panel. And part of that is recognizing that you're going to have biases when you sit in that room. There's going to be, very obvious biases. There's going to be those unconscious biases, which are the more dangerous of them, right?
Sure.
The ones where, you get the proverbial, recruit whose name is Mike, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm like, my wife ran away with a guy named Mike 2 weeks ago, right? Now, and this Mike, the recruit Mike, could be the best guy in the world, but, I'm not trained to recognize that that's going to get in the way of how I score recruit Mike, right? And so we allow people to just kind of go in there, and it's kind of a freewheeling exercise. They're not trained. The interview questions are old. The grading system is often very pedestrian. It's just, you've got 4 people, and they're doing a 1 to 10 scale. On things like character, which is why I'm sitting in this podcast in the first place. It's like, well, I think he's maybe like a 7 on that level of character, based on one of our silly questions. This, this is a cultural issue in the fire service, by the way. This is not as simple as saying, wow, okay, I've got a chief watching 5-alarm podcast right now, and Chief Dave Robertson is definitely onto something regarding interviewing for character, hiring for character, and so we're gonna definitely go down that path. Well, it's not that simple, right? We still have a healthy number of departments where we get recruit Mike out there, right? And I volunteer at a seniors home. And he's got the handlebar mustache, and I teach at a fire academy, and I volunteer at a fire academy, and I've got a trade, and he's basically, he sits there and he looks like a firefighter, and that's almost good enough, and we know it isn't, right? That's kind of on the front end too. Like we've had, I've spoken a lot in the last few minutes on on the interview process and how that kind of fails, these people still are eventually passing probation. And these are the ones that end up going downtown, hiring a couple of strippers, and going down to the fountain in the main square and having the strippers hang off the engine for a funny Christmas card photo. Right? And that's how, and that level of misconduct is, I mean, the newspaper is, it's almost once a week where there's some element of misconduct.
Hmm.
So not only the person that is actually performing that act, we missed them in the process, in the vetting process, but there's also captains and chiefs that are kind of allowing that level of culture to inhabit their department. Well, somebody hired them too, right? And so it's so that, you know, it's not just kind of a now thing. You know, that chief has been in there for 20 or 25 or 30 years. Somebody hired him and missed that he or she obviously does not have the level of character to be inhabiting that white shirt that they're wearing. So it's a cultural issue. And like any other cultural issue, obviously, this is, you know, it's the turning of the ship, right? It's, you know, how many miles of ocean it takes, how long it takes to turn that ship. It's a tough one. It's a tough one to address. It's a tough one to change. There are good examples out there, Steve, for sure. You know, I am always heartened to hear people talk about Chief Bernasini. I still, every once in a while, I'll come across somebody that's going through the assessment center. They're moving from firefighter into some level of company officer, and they've got Bruno's book on customer service.
Yep.
You know, the fire department as a customer service organization. So that's heartening. I follow a number of departments. One of them that comes to mind is I think it's called Pearland.
Pearland, yeah, Jacob Johnson.
Jake Johnson.
He's assistant chief now.
Yeah. Everything. Anytime I've heard him on a podcast, like, okay, that guy, he gets it. He understands that this is more about what we used to call wearing the cool pants, right? It's not about, you know, looking good in a navy blue shirt and a badge.
He was just on a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, he was on your podcast?
Oh yeah, he's been on several times.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Great guy.
He really is. He really is. You know, I remember listening to him about how he almost instinctively steps into a mentor role for virtually every probationary firefighter. He leaves his office and he walks, you know, he's not a desk jockey. He's out there on the tarmac. What can I do to help you? How can I help you fall in love with this job? Right. And he recognizes a lot of the elements that make up good character at the front end in the vetting process, which is why that department is such a solid department. So there's
also,
great examples there.
In this podcast, and he mentioned it the first time he was on as well, but in this one from a couple of weeks ago, he talks about how he screwed up as a lieutenant with his first mentoree.
Mm-hmm.
And that made him the man he is today by learning from that mistake and growing and becoming a better person. He was already a good firefighter. They made him a lieutenant, but he had to be a better person.
Mm-hmm.
Learn to be a better person so that he could help this young man better. It didn't pan out, but the young man found his way into our armed forces. He's stationed now back in the States. He's married, and he and Jacob speak probably, he said, maybe once every couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
They're still in touch with each other, even after the faux pas. But what Jake stresses the fact that he knew he had to go back and try to fix this after he realized how bad he had dropped the ball. And if it happened to him, he wanted to make sure that he didn't do that to anybody else. And that's why he is the person he is today. You know, when he first came on, he was battalion chief. Now he's assistant chief. And I think that speaks and they're growing. Their department is growing. They should have 3 or 4 more stations in the next 5 years. That's how fast the area and their department is expanding. So he is a great example of what you're saying is he knows how to look at a candidate now for what their value is and their values are.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
That's the way we have to look at it. In other words, what are their values, and do they work within the values of our philosophy in this department? And I think that has to be whoever that primary interviewer is going to be in any department. You have to come to the table with that level of thinking. We need people in our department. We want to get the best people we can, and we want them to. Not everybody comes from a fire background. I wasn't. My dad worked for supermarket chain in the office of supermarket chain for 40-some years. But I knew how to use basic tools, hammers and screwdrivers and hand drills, and I could do soldering. I taught myself and things like that. So when I got to the fire service, yes, I had to be trained on fire service details, but basic day-to-day stuff, I was good with already. A lot of kids today, or I shouldn't say kids, everybody's a kid to me. I'm so old. But our young people today need to be able to say to themselves, what are my values? I'm going to apply for a job in one of the branches of public safety, fire, EMS, law enforcement. What are my values? And do those values coalesce together with the values of the department or the branch I want to be in? And I think that what we should do, part of it, is that we need to advertise that. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for people with values to learn to share our values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, and maybe, like you have people like Jacob Johnson. We have people like our mutual friend, Chief Dennis Rubin. Chief Arjuna George. These people who they're leaders, but they're humanistic leaders. It's not just a cut and dry, this is a ladder and this is what you are. You're just a ladder to me. They look at you as a person and they care about you as a person. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be as far into the behavioral health initiative as we're into now. And I think that's going to come up a little bit in the second segment of what we were discussing, because you brought it up. Very important that we're talking about this today as well, is the concept, and we promote the behavioral health initiative and the cancer initiative on every single podcast through public service announcements. Every single podcast. Now we have them both there, because if we don't, if in my eyes as the creator and host of this podcast, if I don't talk about the key issues that are facing our fire departments today, then I'm just trying to listen to my voice and say, hey, I'm a great podcast host. Oh, I'm the only one listening to me, but I'm still great. Can't do that. Right. We need to guide and teach and mentor, but if we don't have the right clay, you're not going to make a nice vase or an urn. If the mixed water and the clay mixture isn't right, it's just going to fall every time, or it's going to blow up in the kiln. We need to have that mixture right, and that's what we need with the people that we're interviewing and bringing into the fire service. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to take a break here. We'll take a quick break, folks. When we come back, we're going to be taking where we launched from with Chief Robertson in this first segment, and we're going to be talking about solutions. I just gave an idea, but Chief Robertson is going to talk about would-be solutions towards deepening the vetting process. So if you're a regular viewer of the show on YouTube, you know that nothing's going to change for you. If you're listening to the audio, well, we'll play a couple of PSAs here, and then we'll be right back with our guest, Chief Dave Robertson, on another episode of 5 of Them Task Force. As always, please stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to this episode of Five Alarm Task Force. I'm your host, Steve Green, and with me today is our guest, Chief Dave Robertson. Right now, he's up in Canada, but he also was in the fire service down here in the U.S. So it gives him a really good view of the two, I can't say philosophies, but how our two countries work the fire service. So he knows both the U.S. and Canadian fire services really well. One of the things that we mentioned in the bio in the intro today, and we're going to be talking about as we continue this topic, hiring based on character, that we started in Unit 1. And we are going to be talking about solutions towards deepening the vetting process. But the chief mentioned in his bio his own struggles with PTSI or PTSD. So before we define some of that, Chief, can you tell us what PTSI is different from PTSD, please?
Sure. So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that's an older term. It's still recognized. It's still used in most circles when we talk about that level of distress after usually cumulative trauma. But PTSD is still, medically speaking, still a bit of a ghost, right? Where somebody can go on that one bad call, a new recruit, and that's enough. And the automatic assumption is, well, they must have been predisposed to having it. Maybe not. It's still pretty early in the stages of really understanding how it works. But one of the things that the medical community, the psychiatric community, is doing is they're moving away from calling it a disorder and actually recognizing, especially with cumulative trauma, calling PTSI, which is post-traumatic stress injury. With cumulative psychological trauma, the amygdala, which is that's the part of the brain that releases that magical cocktail that has us move into fight, flight, or freeze. There are alterations to the amygdala, an enlargement of it. And so you end up where it's actually releasing norepinephrine, and cortisol, and a few other hormones that put us into that fight or flight feeling, that, the bad butterflies, but it's in a loop. So you're feeling it constantly, 24/7. So PTSI is actually, especially for police, fire, military, tends to be a more accurate name. So that's where that comes from.
Yeah, and it does clear it up. I think I like that it's looking at as an injury, and thankfully not having anything really bad from it. But this young kid I met when he was 18 years old, we got into the same fire department the same night. He's still my best friend today, 44 years later or so.
Wow, that's awesome.
And there were several calls, really difficult calls that we were on together that we talk with each other about. Almost every time we have a chance to be together, not on the phone, which is just casual, 5-6 minutes, just checking in with each other, usually once a week. But when we able to spend time together, there were a couple of calls that we were on together, very difficult calls, very tragic calls, and that we just talk it out amongst ourselves, so it's something that we haven't forgotten in those 40 plus years. It still bothers us a little bit. Mm-hmm. We did what had to be done. We did our jobs, and we did them well. Thank God. But doesn't mean that it still doesn't hurt. Every once in a while, it's tucked away in that little dark corner, and we feel it's better to let it out for a little air with each other than letting it stay there and build up. So
yeah, absolutely. That's
yeah.
No, I was just going to say, there's a number of things that are working to kind of remedy the effects, or at least mitigate the effects of PTSD, PTSI. But one of the most successful is having a great support system behind you. And part of that support system is just conversational talk therapy. So you and your best friend are doing exactly one of the things that that very much limits PTSD to really get a grapple hold on you and start getting you into that loop that you where you end up stuck.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's we talked about Chief Arjuna George, who is very open about his battle with PTSD as well, and burnout.
Yep.
And even though I only had 8 years, I wouldn't say I was burned out, but some of the calls can take a toll on you.
Oh yeah.
But
It,
and
it
again,
only
like you
it
said,
can take fun.
yeah, if you have that good group in your circle that you talk with all the time, and you guys would sit in the firehouse on the couches just talking about stuff, and hey, do you remember that call we had like 6 months ago with that, and we just talked that out. When you do that, I think, as you just said, you're chipping away at the wall that tries to make us separate ourselves from everybody else because of it, and rather we say, oh man, I can't, this is great, I can talk with somebody else about it, and they know what I'm talking about.
Right, right. For the longest time, it was the chin wag across the parking lot, right? The hey, you all right? Yeah, I'm all right. Good.
Or like I got after my first bad call, it was, and we got back into the firehouse, and after we cleaned up and everything, that I was in the washroom, and I was puking, I was crying. It was really bad, and I came out and I'd washed my face, but the guy who was our driver in the call said, "You all right?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess." He goes, "This call?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Suck it up." So that was the 3 words of great mental behavioral health promotion is "suck it up" back in those days.
That was the culture, right? And it's taken us a while to, with great people like Arjuna George, AJ, as he is affectionately called. He wrote the book, literally Burnout.
Yeah.
Another good friend of mine, Christy Warren, is fantastic at describing her struggles. She was a captain in the Berkeley Fire Department. We've become good friends, and I had the honor of being on her podcast as well. But she just wrote a book called Flashpoint, and she had some significant struggles as well. She worked in virtually the same. We were literally, I think it was like 3 miles, 4 miles away as the crow flies. Our careers were very similar, and we didn't know it until I ended up on the podcast. But she's another person that recognizes the effects of it, and how to mitigate those effects, and the fact that the old culture used to be suck it up, right?
Yeah.
And years later, let's take the edge off with alcohol. Like I always say, the problem with alcohol is it works, right? And it's no secret, firefighters, there is a culture of some hard drinking in fire culture, and I think a lot of that is probably less about the fraternity of the fire service, the fraternity and sorority, because we have our sisters as well in the fire service. It's less about that, and I think we frame it like that. We give it that context because that fits the mythology of the North American firefighter, right? We're just gonna go out. We're gonna have a great. You think about these even good movies like Ladder 49. There's like 4 or 5 different drinking scenes in that. But in reality, I think we're just taking the edge off, and not in a healthy way.
It's frosting without the cake.
Yeah, frosting without. I love that. That's great. Frosting without cake. I'm stealing that one.
That's right. So we talked about, you mentioned here that if we keep the concept of PTSI or PTSD open to recruits right at the front of their career, we will be hopefully helping them reach that long and joyful career. So
Yes.
as how do we bring this in to this deepening as we deepen the vetting process? Does it play a role in that as we're vetting new candidates, or is that something we have to wait till they're going into the academy, or they're out of the academy coming into the department as active firefighters? How do you define that, please?
Well, I think there's a couple things in order for me to address that. One of them is I'm going back to, again, and I know it's getting a little repetitive, but it's true. It is at least partly a cultural issue, right? And so the more we bring this to light, the more that people end up like AJ and Christy Warren end up on podcasts telling their stories and offering solutions and making sure that what you're going to go through is actually okay. It's okay to be screwed up a little bit by it, because we're going to see the worst of the worst. So culturally, I think that's at least part of the fix, and we're moving in that direction. So that's a positive. But going back to the vetting process, where does that fit in the vetting process? I think ensuring that the recruits know, especially those younger ones, ensuring that they know what it is that they're getting into. And it's got to be more than a throwaway sentence. Now, remember, you're going to see some tough stuff, kid. That's not good enough, right? It's got to be part of the program in the probationary process, or at least in academy, where they have a 1-day class or a 2-day class on mental fitness and mental agility, and actually have it offered up by, right? And it's a day or two, but that day or two may change the entire trajectory of that recruit's career in a positive way. I don't think it's a big ask to have that as part of the process. People, going back to the very start of the process, though, the vetting process, recognizing sound character, or recognizing a recruit that displays sound characteristics of somebody that is a person of virtue. Things like we talked about Jacob Johnson, for example, and what he's about, and how he recognized he had to learn. Well, recognition of the problem and moving towards a solution, that speaks to humility, that virtue, and engagement in bettering yourself, and that virtue. You need to ask the recruit for examples of that, right? Tell us about a time when you actually made a significant mistake, and we need to not allow them in that script that I talked about in the first half, where they're just telling us the same thing. Tell us about a weakness of yours. Oh, I think I work too hard. And they all say that it's, I tend to be a perfectionist. Okay, that's BS. Okay, stop it. Stop it as a recruit, if you're a recruit listening to this, and stop it and asking those stupid questions in the interview room. Actually ask them for something significant, robust, situational, that has them display that level of virtue. But by having that sound cocktail of virtues, things that we call moral fiber, by having that as a foundation, you will have elements of humility and the ability to better yourself. And I think that gives you that foundation to mitigate the effects of PTSD. So if we find them on the front end, they have that level of EQ, emotional quotient, or now they're also talking about SQ, social quotient, along with your IQ and your firefighter IQ. You're going to have that to be able to navigate the minefield of PTSD. So I think that's where that lands.
Okay, that's good. So with that being said, now, so let's go into a little bit more of your suggestions for solutions to deepen the vetting process, make it more professional, and about the real job itself. Let's get the icing and put that aside, because without, again, we can eat a can of frosting, but it's not going to be as filling as a nice slice of the cake with the frosting in it. So
right.
How do we mold the vetting process to get the information that we really need as from the professional side, and so that the prospective candidate has a good idea of what they're going to be asked about, and make sure that everybody's on a basically on the same page.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the ways, I mean, just there's two ways to kind of look at it. One of them is kind of very broadly the fire service in general, and those thought leaders, those fire service thought leaders that have the reach and have the ear of us knuckleheads in the fire service. So we're listening to what they say. People like Dennis Rubin and Anthony Castros, as well as another great one. The communications that you actually push out there, recognizing that you have that level of reach, that you have those ears listening to you, is making sure that you start bringing it into the conversation. That it's not about get into the interview room, kid, and sell yourself. No, it's actually got to be about truly revealing yourself and revealing your level of character, revealing your values, and trying to see if they align with that department's values. So pushing those communications out in a very broad sense, that cultural change is part of it. But on a kind of a more granular level, I guess, right down to the fire department, is stop thinking that the fire service is 1958, right? I mean, I have real hot button for me is aggressive firefighting, right? For example, right? So we say, it's because the word assertive firefighting, which is about moving forward, mission critical, you can go hard, but you're doing it smartly. But the word assertive is not sexy, is it?
Right.
The word aggressive is actually a negative word. Right? Yeah. You have an aggressive dog. A guy's being aggressive towards his girlfriend in a domestic dispute. Things that are aggressive are typically, except for firefighting, that's okay, right? Because it's sexy. It sounds like 1958. I think you need to, in your fire department, throw that idea away, right? It's progressive is just you're just not going to hide from it, right? 1975, Chicago was still doing, the work pants and the fold down boots, right? No turnout pants. Drager was just on the front end of SCBAs, Drager and MSA, right? And now look at us, right? People are standing up and fighting for the NFPA to be stricter in their standards for turnout gear. Which is great. That level. So the fire department is about progression. And I think you need to recognize, especially as a chief, but if your department is still trapped in, it is balls to the wall, aggressive firefighting, screw EMS, and all that kind of stuff. Well, like feeds like. That's all you're going to get in the interview room too, right? That's all you're going to ask those questions that actually have that person reveal whether or not they're. Are you really going to fit in, kid? You can almost hear the gravelly voice. The metaphor gravelly voice. So we need to do that at the department level. And part of that change, I kind of visualize taking the page of old interview questions and crumbling them up and throwing them away. That's kind of that's cute, Dave. That's a nice, cute little concept. What can you do solidly? I think not having your interview panel be the hand raise interview panel. Yeah, I'm in. Actually making sure that they are guided through a robust process, how to listen properly, how to recognize your own biases, how they're going to affect our grading system. Taking a look, revisiting the grading system. Are you really stuck on still a 1 to 10 system? Or worse, I've seen 1 to 5. Or somewhat likely, very likely. Like I've seen 1 to 3 even now that I think about it, or unlikely. It's got to be, you've got to dig in, right? People will go to a 5-day truck academy all day long about truck operations. Yes, that's actually fantastic. I'm all in. Absolutely. And they'll spend 30 minutes figuring out interview questions. Kind of speaking out of both sides of their mouth, right?
Yeah.
Everything happens in the interview room. We got to come up with some questions, and they'll Google, and they'll just kind of pluck 10 questions off Google, thinking they're good enough. That's so part of the solution is very much recognizing that your department, especially those departments that are having high fail rates in academy, high fail rates in probation, or misconduct issues, something's happening. Recognize that something's happening. You need to be the solution that is about throwing away your current interview process and making your new process robust. There are resources out there. There are consultants out there. You can also self-educate. Absolutely. Think about people like Arjuna George, right? He is, right now he talks about burnout as a chief, but he is just generally a very sound person manager, right? He's a sharp character. Those people are out there that are willing to lend a hand and guide you through having a better process. Another part of looking at your process, right? Everything happens in the interview room. We've got 30 minutes. We want to have you in our uniform for somewhere between 20 and 30 years, but we're going to give you a half hour. Which, by the way, I've gamed that out. It typically isn't half an hour. You typically have, by the time you explain the process, make introductions, and get past the first BS question, tell us about yourself, you typically have somewhere around 22 minutes. Right? But we're hiring you for 30 years. Okay. So I think, just at the application process, that needs to be tighter. 10 check boxes, do they have this, and this? Yeah, good enough. You're moving on in the process. That's just not good enough. It's just not good enough. We need to take a look at, what it is we're actually asking. We're never hiring a firefighter, by the way. We are always hiring a future captain, a future chief. Right? These are the people that are going to guide and lead. And even if they aren't true leaders, they're going to be at least in a position of authority. And 10 questions in the interview room, Googled questions, 30 minutes, maybe 45. That's just not good enough. So I think the key solution is throwing away your process and revisiting it. I don't know why this analogy comes to me, but I think about the time that we were speccing out a new ladder truck, and there were several meetings on just whether or not we were going to move away from a quint, because we had one quint and 200 footers. A quint for your listeners is typically 50 footer, sometimes a 75, but typically about a 50 footer. And it's kind of a half engine, half ladder truck. Were we going to get rid of that and get a third truck? Or were we also just going to get rid of the trucks and move to tillers? Right. Well, then we get the spec committee, the specifications committee in, made up of firefighters. How is storage going to work? How is it going to change our tools? How this? Why are you doing all that? Well, come on, man, it's going to cost us $1 million. Well, yeah, you're exactly right. What's a new employee going to cost you? Not even just the dollar amount, which is huge. What's it going to cost you if you just your interview process is a throwaway process, right? You'll spend, maybe, if you include the background check, the application process, and just those elements that you are involved in, the physical agility in the interview, you're, 3 hours? Maybe 5 tops, reading the resume. Yeah, okay, that's great. And that person comes in and we didn't vet them properly and they become a cancer to our culture, right? I think of some of the people in my department, and they are, to date, some of the worst people I've come across in my life. Which is, that's part of my personal story, is I just happen to be at a particular stage. Everything I hear about my old department now is it's great. They're definitely moving towards some great stuff. Sorry about that. Not my phone. Sorry for the listeners. Not at my house, not on my phone. It's life happening, right? It's the proverbial dog barking in the background.
Exactly.
Well, somebody hired those guys, right? Somebody gave them only that 3 or 4 hours, but we're going to spend $1 million on a truck, 30, 50, 100 hours. We're going to fly people up to Minnesota to make sure that they get the tour of where it's being made and all that kind of stuff. We're going to do the push-in ceremony. That's amazing. But we're going to give you a 30-minute interview. So when you put it in that kind of context, it's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it?
Oh, sure.
It's kind of mind-blowing. Sure. So back to solutions. The solution is you gotta crumple up that page of old interview questions. Get your hands out of Google, get your hands off the keyboard, and sit down and actually make it a serious, significant, robust process to just come up with sound interview situational questions. That's my opinion.
I think that could bring such improvement to the fire service in both our countries, because doing that, I think we're going to see that the person coming in a different light. We'll see him in a broader light as well, rather than looking through a peephole, because that's all we got with that 30-minute, 10, fill out the 10 questions, true or false, and then, okay, thanks very much for coming in. And that's it. Whereas instead of just having a little microscope, we have a telescope, and we get a good look at them and know we can see their personality. We can see their likes in life, their dislikes in life, their strengths. Maybe there are weaknesses, maybe they have, one of the things I remember a couple of years ago when the whole brouhaha started on social media about the younger generation coming in. They don't have any skill sets from the trades or anything. Yeah, but who the hell you think is flying those drones for us, for our military? Those are those kids, because they grew up with hand-eye coordination playing those video games. Mm-hmm. So where I grew up playing tools that my dad gave me in the garage, and I learned how to use those, hand-eye video games, really not my forte. But you give me a 22-year-old kid who was playing it since he was 4 years old, and he's now flying our drones over not so friendly areas to protect us. I'm okay with that kid. So if we can,
the fire service,
yeah.
You and I were talking about Alan Bernasini and customer service and how we need to take care of Mrs. Smith. Well, one of the ways that we take care of Mrs. Smith, one of the key ways, are the initiatives for having working smoke detectors in homes. Guess how we get that message out? Social media. Guess what the new generation is incredibly adept at? Social media, right? So, I mean, it's their skill sets are different. They're not better or worse. They're just different. I regret not capturing this. I think it was just a meme. I think it was just somebody had dropped something in LinkedIn, and it was headlines cut out from 3 or 4 generations, all the way back to the 20s. This generation doesn't understand what we're all about. This coming generation, is absolutely late, et cetera, et cetera. We've been saying that, so it's definitely, it's not necessarily anything new. They don't know a trade. They don't know how to swing a hammer, for God's sakes. Okay, well, no, but they certainly understand the issues with lithium-ion batteries. They certainly understand the MDT, the mobile data terminal, and all the programs that we need to work with in our reporting systems in North America, like in the States, NFIRS, National Fire Incident Reporting System. That's getting a full hot wash. They're totally redoing that. All the LMS systems, the learning management systems, like Vector Solutions, for example, is one of the bigger ones. Somebody's got to navigate all that. How many firefighters have you heard say, "I'm just not good on computers," or "I hate social media"? Well, guess who's good? Guess who's the 27-year-old?
Exactly.
Yeah, they just different skill sets.
Right. And I think we need to play in that. And again, we go to other things that can help with that, which is the senior firefighter in that firehouse. He can be that guide. He can be that mentor and help with patience and understanding, because that's what it takes to be a teacher and a mentor. Is he can guide some of the new recruits who may not have all the skill sets that we would normally look for maybe 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago, but they're coming in, as you said, with a different set of skill sets that could be very, very valuable to the fire service. Look at Look at the growth. I mean, Chief Charlie Werner has become a good friend over the years, but with drone responders, look at what
Mhm.
drones have become in the fire service and in law enforcement and EMS. Okay. With all due respect, a lot of us older guys, I would probably crash my first 5 drones. Okay. And those are just little tiny play ones that
Yeah.
people are, 15 years ago. But now you have a $4,000, $5,000, $12,000 drone. You want the right person being able to control that. And
Mhm.
that's what those kids are great at, because they got that eye-hand, coordination that some of us older people just don't have.
You know
So,
what else they're good at is uh, culturally, millennials are very experiential. They really like experiences.
mhm,
Right? We know that hiring that worldly firefighter as a recruit, that's somebody that is typically going to give us that 25 or 30 year. They're the ones that step into leadership roles. They're the ones that are a little more progressive in their thinking. Millennials tend to travel more. They tend to not be afraid of academia. It's self-directed stuff. Leaders are readers. So that's another great skill set that they have. So looking at them at the front end of the process and recognizing, on your resume, show me something other than fire. I taught CPR. Okay, well, what else? Where have you been? What have you done? Did you spend 6 months with your church in a mission in Africa? That's amazing, right? Did you actually take a gap year? Which is funny enough, is is something that is kind of heralded in places like England, and in the States, it's like you're lazy. To me, you're taking a gap year and you're going to travel and see different people and hear different languages and taste different foods and different smells and navigate different cities around the world. If that's what you're doing for your gap year, if you're traveling or doing a work study program abroad, well, guess what? Maybe Mrs. Smith isn't Mrs. Smith. Maybe she's Mrs. Singh, who is a fairly new immigrant into our country, and we're navigating that at 2 o'clock in the morning. So those level of experiences are incredibly valuable. And so I think millennials are definitely, we shortchange them in the fire service for no other reason than they can't swing a hammer.
yeah.
So that's just not good enough.
I know that even when I was given that application for the volunteer department, the chief said to me, he says, "I hope you'll seriously consider it, Mr. Green, because you'll be the first college graduate to join this department." And I kind of was taken aback by that, but I said, "Well, I'm going to give it serious consideration, Chief, and thank you for the invitation." I didn't go to the station that day to apply. I just wanted to see the shiny red trucks like I did all around Greater Boston growing up. I never planned on being a firefighter, but it became, as I mentioned, before we started recording, it became how I define myself.
Mm-hmm.
All these years later, and I will always be grateful to him for taking a chance on a kid who had no fire background whatsoever, but had college background. I was also a water safety instructor already, and I ran the swimming test and senior life saving at the university I studied at as well. So he liked that, and that's why he gave me the chance. And I feel that I was blessed that was the right people at the right time, and I saw them as something good, and they saw me as something good, and we made that good match for those 4 years. And
I want to be careful and recognizing somebody that has a trade that is good, and that is
absolutely,
absolutely. I'm not trying to say no to that. I'm saying that if that is your mantra, we're just going to hire somebody that actually does have a trade. And these kids don't have trades, and so we can't find anybody. That's what I mean. That's not good enough.
yeah, agreed.
I like the fire department. Personally, I'm not fire department as family. I very much respect that a lot of people do see fire department as family, and there are definitely familial elements of life in the fire service for sure. but I like it more as a sports team. And I'm a Canadian guy, so hockey, obviously, but hockey is now all across North America. Right now, it's in the Stanley Cup Finals. At the time of this recording, it's Las Vegas and Florida.
Yeah,
So,
Panthers. No,
so
yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And when you're building that team, you're not going to have a team of only defensemen, right? You're going to have some defensemen, goalie, backup goalie, maybe even sometimes a third. You're going to have, at that level, you don't even have just we're going to need three centermen. No, you actually have three or four or five centermen, three key ones, two backups, and you'll actually plug them in at different parts of the game depending on where the game is the trajectory of that particular game is going. That's at the pro level. That's how granular they get. Well, we're professionals too, the professional firefighter. And go back to again why I'm here, which is about the vetting process and trying to recognize character. We'll just in terms of what we hire, we just want a good guy, right? We just want somebody that actually it's going to do our department proud. They're going to make sure that they take care of Mrs. Smith, but we don't really again vet them very very carefully. If we look at ourselves as a pro team, a mission critical team, we actually should be getting as granular as the pro sports teams that we look at. You know what? We really do need somebody that is going to champion community paramedicine and actually look for just one or two of those people. We actually are speccing out a new truck and it's going to have a whole lot of new tech on it. We really would like to find just one or two new recruits within our 10 recruit hiring that is actually very tech savvy. And get that granular as well. I don't know why we're afraid of it. We kind of, here's our box.
Right.
Do you that box? And again, I've said it 17 times in this podcast, but I say it a lot. That's just not good enough. There's no reason why we can't get that granular.
Right. Very true. So I'd be remiss if we don't talk about Fire Edge.
Fire Edge. It very much aligns with everything that I've been saying here. It started very accidentally. I was mentoring people without knowing I was mentoring them. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a talker, and so when you get somebody that is new to the fire service, or they were trying to get into the fire service and they were struggling with it, they just they really thought that, hey, I'm in shape and I've gone to fire academy, where's my job? And they needed to be enlightened as to what the whole process is really about. And so I was actually guiding them through that process. And I eventually developed that into, oh, pardon me. I've got a beep going on and I don't know what it is.
Okay.
It's an alarm in my parents. Do you want to pause this for 1 sec?
Yeah, I'll pause it here 1 second.
Okay, back at it. Sorry to your listeners about that. I'm actually not at my home base. I'm in somebody else's home, and their alarm went off. I was talking about Fire Edge and how it's become this. Well, it's a business, but what I do is I guide fire recruits the entire process, and part of that process, I kind of I started moving them towards on the recruit end, making sure that they reveal themselves, making sure that they found not the mission statement of a fire department. I think mission statements are mostly BS, right? We strive to protect and to blah 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 blah, right? It's the mission statements are all the same. It's the vision statement that is really the gem in a fire department's communication. That's where they really reveal what their values are about. How are we moving forward? How are we going to achieve the mission that we put out? Mission statements and vision statements are totally different. Find the mission statement. Within the mission statement, you'll find the values for that department. And then recognize whether or not you have those values within yourself. And then we will work towards how you actually present those values in the interview room. I hear consistently that, and I do this for the love of it. I definitely do. This is not a monetary thing at all.
That's
so
like me in this podcast.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so you totally know what. Yeah, absolutely. You know what I mean. And so doing it, out of love, I'm not ashamed to say that I've actually heard people, recruits that will have gotten hired, and they will get a debriefing from the interview panel, and they'll say, you knocked your interview out of the park, like you were a home run in that interview room. I'm very proud to say that they did the work and they did the talking. They were the grunts that were actually sitting in that chair, but it's a process that very much aligns with everything we've talked about here today, and that is about making sure that you reveal yourself, right? Going in and telling the interview panel what you think they want to hear, and that your why is I just want to help people. That's, on the recruit end of things, that's not good enough, right?
Right.
So that's what I do with Fire Edge.
All right, great. Well, we're going to put that information in the show notes, so that if you want to reach Chief Robertson, we'll have his email there for you, and you can reach out to him to learn more about Fire Edge, especially if you're listening now and you're thinking about going into the fire service. You're maybe going to your local academy through a local college or a local academy, and then you're looking to get hired. Well, this might be a way to hone your skills between what you've learned and what you've prepped already, and learning how to really get in there for your interview. And, it's funny because we see this in many other jobs in our society, where we'll prep you to how to be a good executive and how to be, but we don't have a lot of people doing this kind of business to help people who want to become firefighters, especially in today's age, where I think it's is more necessary and needed than back in our early days. But this gives them the guidance, and you're not giving them. It's not like you've amassed answers to all these exams and you're going to just share them with the cheat sheets. You're actually teaching them how to think and how to talk about this passion that they feel they have, as opposed to reality. And we're not trying to bust a bubble. You're just trying to actually make them fit together, if it's at all possible. If you can see that potential in them. And, we probably need, all over the two countries, we need people to do this. Because
there are some people out there for sure.
There are a few,
there are a few. Sadly, there are some charlatans out there, that are, they overcharge, and I know for damn sure they have Googled interview questions, and their whole idea of interview prep is just walking you through one or two sessions with them, and they're just basically doing the sell yourself thing. It saddens me that there are recruits that get roped into that, and they're wondering why they're getting hired is taking 3, 4, 5 years, because they really believe that what they've been coached on is sound. There are some coaches out there that are charlatans, for sure. My process personally, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of talking about my business, but my process is about the one-page resume. They've done studies on this. Typical HR person takes just over 8 seconds to read a resume. If you're a 24-year-old who's been to college and you've got a 3-page resume, just no. So we talk about the resume, then we talk about the cover letter. The cover letter is your first opportunity to be in the chief's office to answer the question why. But most cover letters are, I would be a good candidate because, and then they will give their resume back in sentence form. So they waste the cover letter. They waste that opportunity to answer what their why is about. I give them a dig deep questionnaire. It is 30 questions, and they are tough questions. They get in here pretty deep. I have them involve family in working through that dig deep questionnaire, and then we'll work through that and have them recognize what it is they're about. And for some people, this process is it's outright revelation as to what they're about.
Right.
So it's a solid process, I believe.
That's great. That really is. And, maybe you need to franchise it, because we sure as heck need more of this in the fire service in both our countries, to give good people the chance of success in the application process. That's
You
what we
said
want
it
to
so
do.
well, Steve. We've let some good people fall through the cracks because they did not give us back the scripted answers that we are still demanding in the fire service.
Yeah. And it's 2023. It's time for some changes.
Yeah, amen to that.
Time for some changes. Well, Chief, I can't thank you enough. This was a great podcast. It came from out of the blue when you sent me that message on LinkedIn. It actually made all the time I have to spend on LinkedIn worthwhile, because you saw me there and you looked at the podcast and you said, I think would be a good fit. And you were 1,000% right. This was a great topic. We have not covered it before like this. We've talked about it in general, but not with anybody who specializes in it like you have, with a career like you've had, and in both countries. So what I like about that especially is because, well, we do it a little different way up here. We do a little different way down here. You know what? We're still firefighters. We may have, our districts may have different makeup of residential, some industrial, heavy. That doesn't make, we're still basic firefighters. We still do the basic things. We put the wet stuff on the red stuff. We help people in auto accidents. We do extrications. We do building collapses. We do what we have to do to help society.
Mm-hmm.
It's how we get there and how we do it that needs some fine tuning.
Yes, absolutely.
And getting there
is
your new way.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's about time we make some changes. We listen. We know this is longstanding. We probably say this on every podcast, but the two things that firefighters detest the most: change and status quo.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So sometimes it's a bitter pill to swallow, but when we have people to lead us, and you know what, I was remiss, because one of our other great leaders today is Billy Goldfeder, Chief Billy Goldfeder.
Oh, yes.
Okay. And he is just a no-nonsense firefighter, a heck of a nice guy who loves what he does, loves helping firefighters. And, the fact is that when he speaks, I still listen. And I didn't even know that the year I was in Cincinnati going to school there, I lived within 3 miles, I think, of him. I lived within, I think, 1.5 miles of Josh Blum, who's in Blue Ash. And but I never made it. I went when I was living in this outside of the city of Cincinnati. I did apply to a volunteer fire department, but they said, can you come during the days? I said, no, I'm a student. I can come at night. He goes, no, we got enough at night. Never mind. Thanks anyway. And I went away. So I wouldn't have met them through the fire service in Cincinnati, but it was nice to know that these two great leaders and firefighters we're right there. And I've gotten to know them a little bit, ever since. And you have Chief John Vance and you have Nick Brunacini, we've talked about as well. I mean, we have great people who want to teach you to be safer, to be better, not tearing down what you do, just adding to that knowledge. And
Tony Correa is another one.
Chief Tony, he's just on
Tony Correa,
a couple months ago.
I'm not going to do it the right service, but he for a long time did a great FDIC talk basically about character, and it was something about elements of character before Halligans and Hoses. It was this very catchy title, but he's a mentor of mine, actually.
Oh, and, he is.
Yeah,
he's a great mentor. He was the one who taught me when I was doing I invited him to be on a podcast on recruitment and retention. He goes, Stevie, it's got to be retention and recruitment, because if you can't keep the people you have, you're not going to recruit it. No one's going to come into your department.
Yeah.
And I said,
that's definitely a chicken and egg question.
Yeah. I said to him, I said, I never looked at it that way.
Well, and I would offer up Tony a healthy argument because he is far smarter than I am. And he'll forget more about fire than I'll ever know. But I would offer up if you recruit the right people at the front end, you don't have to worry about retention.
Well, that's true too. Right. That's good. Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
yeah, so I
That's
don't
a
I don't
very
think
good
it
point.
needs to be a binary. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's going to be both, and I think that's why we very smartly, as a professional culture, the fire service looks at it as recruitment and retention. The
Yeah.
two
If,
are
if
both.
you look back a couple of months in our catalog on the website, you'll be able to see the one just with him or on the whatever podcast platform you listen to. All our podcasts are there as well. So a couple of months ago, he was on, and I love to have him because, like you said, he's just a smart firefighter. He's a great smart paramedic
Mhm.
to teach BLS and ALS, but he doesn't. He teaches you not from a book. He teaches you from his heart and his brain. And he doesn't always. He's not waving that book at you. Didn't you see what this national? He's talking about. This is what I was. This is what I saw. This is what I did. This is how I learned. This is who helped me when I needed help. This is who I turned to, and he guided me, or she got whatever the case was. He's such a great teacher, and he talks at such a nice, easy manner that he's just a pleasure to listen to. And again, very, very valuable leader and instructor and teacher in fire and EMS services in this country, without a doubt.
There's only because I know that we're probably getting close to wrapping up, if not outright wrapping up. I just want to throw one last thing out there
Sure.
because I know a lot of volunteer firefighters and volunteer chiefs listen to your podcast, and the volunteer corps makes up the greater number of firefighters in both of our nations.
Yes.
And so you're hiring for volunteers. So if we were to talk about firefighting operations, volunteers are great because they do the same job that a professional does and they don't get paid. That's very true. Operationally, it's the same. That's very true. Auto X is Auto X. A fire is a fire. Medical is medical. It's the same job. They're doing it for free. And there's this fear among chiefs about not having enough volunteers to get the job done. And I think that's an area where they really do just, are you warm-blooded? Are you breathing? We'll put you through the training, and very little in the way of rigor in vetting the volunteers. Well, volunteers they're still firefighters. And nobody knows. Mrs. Smith does not know that big red engine and the 4 people on board that are well wearing navy blue badges are volunteers. She knows that she's called 911 for help, and they're showing up. They need to be of sound character and a solid level of moral fiber as well. So I think that volunteer chiefs need to not be afraid of having a robust interview process as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. No, it is. Having been in 2 volunteer departments and seeing a small problem in one and a little more major problem in another, I would agree wholeheartedly. You can't just take, like you said, are you breathing and is blood pumping through your body? Okay, you qualify. We've checked off all the marks. We'll see you Tuesday night at drill.
Yeah. It's a dilemma. I recognize the dilemma. It's like, we're supposed to have 25 firefighters and I've got 20. Okay. But on the other side of their mouths, they'll say, what, I'll take 10 good people before I take 20 bad ones. Okay, well, pick your 10 good ones. You get to pick them. That's part of your job. So don't be afraid of just making sure that you've got enough numbers filling the uniform.
Right. Exactly. It has to be the right people filling those uniforms.
Absolutely.
That's the thing. Chief, this has been an eye-opening and a very, very educational and pleasant interview. I've learned a lot. And that's why I usually say when I respond to an email for a guest, I always usually say in that last line, looking forward to learning with you.
Yes, you did. Yes.
And this is one of the great cases of that you opened up a lot to me that I may have thought about occasionally, but never looked at as a real topic for the podcast. And yet, once I got, after we talked on the phone, you had me sold there, and then I got the bio, and I said, yeah, we absolutely need this. And
Good.
thank
Well,
you
thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you for reaching out to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known about you maybe at all, or maybe not for a long time. But
Yeah.
I'm going to say that, once you've been a guest, you always have an open invitation to return. So
Awesome.
I'm hoping that since we recently announced that we are going to go ahead with a 8th season,
Excellent. Good.
I'm feeling a bit better, and I spoke with the doctor about it, and she's would very much like to see me continue as long as I'm able to. So we're going to go the 8th season, and let's find a time a few months down the road, and love to have you back.
I'd be honored. I'd be honored.
All right. Well, great. Thank you so very much. Our thanks to Chief Dave Robertson from his company is called Fire Edge. We're going to put his email address in the show notes so you can reach out if you have any questions. And we'll have him back sometime in season 8. That will start in mid-August. And if you didn't hear the announcement, folks, at the end of the last podcast, yes, we have decided to come ahead and do an 8th season, which never believed I'd get past the first one. I was only looking for maybe 5 or 10 firefighters to listen to me when these what I thought were friends cajoled me into doing a podcast. I said, that's great. I'll do it. What's a podcast? And they said, what do you mean? You were in radio. I said, yeah, I did radio. I said, I didn't. What's a podcast? And they told me, and I said, well, I don't know. So next thing I know, I'm buying equipment and installing software, and figured, all right, if I get 10 guys to listen to me, 10 firefighters, that'd be really terrific. And it just,
And now you're
I hate to use the term, but it was a wildfire. And here we are 7 years later. We started in 2016. So here we are finishing up in June of 2023 in a couple more weeks. As a matter of fact, we have coming up this next Monday, especially for our listeners, is going to be Dr. Alberto Caban Martinez and Dr. Natalie Sola, who from the University of Miami, Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center's the Firefighter Cancer Initiative based here in Miami. They are working on that program. Dr. Caban Martinez has been a part of it since I think we came on the air in 2016 or right after that when it launched, and he's been on several times, and they're going to be bringing us an update on, in the state of Florida and in general, the Firefighter Cancer Initiative and what were the breakthroughs that we're making. And then our last one will be, I believe, on the 22nd of this month, and that will be Mrs. Diane Cotter is joining me once again. Diane, who's become a dear friend, though we've never met, as with most of my guests, we've become close friends, though we've never met in purpose. And she and her husband, Paul, were the ones to blow the lid off the PFAS in our bunker gear. When Paul was diagnosed with his cancer, she wasn't satisfied that it was just part of the job. Mm-hmm. And did this and did that, whatever she could do, writing letters, writing emails, all the research she could. And thankfully, she, and along with Dr. Graham Peasley at University of Notre Dame, the nuclear physicist who did the exam of the PFAS of all the gear, going back to my year, 77, there was PFAS in my gear back in 77. She's going to be joining us for a wrap of where we are and where we've come over the last couple of years with the Firefighter Cancer Initiative and the PFAS issue. So we have more for you this month, and then we're going to take our summer break. I need it. I need to rest up a little bit, and then we'll be back in August, starting season 3 with new guests and some returning favorites as well. So to all of you, if you're watching the video, thank you very much. The video will end right here. If you're listening to the audio, well, you know how it's going to work. We're going to take a break after we say goodbye to our guests, and then we'll be back with a little bit more on 5-Alarm Task Force audio version. To all of you who have joined us, thank you very much. Just remember, please be safe, be well, and let's take care of each other. Thank you, folks.